This is Just Right. Sweet Haven Farm, Sweet Small Town Romance, Book 3. Written by Jessie Gussman. Performed by J. Dice. Episode 9. Chapter 13. Gator hated the words even as they left his mouth. He didn't beg, and he accepted someone's no. Except, apparently, when that no came from Avery telling him she didn't want to hurt him. Heck, when was the last time a woman was concerned about hurting him? Ever? Other than his mother. She hesitated when he spoke. Both lips drew in and her eyes shimmered before she spun and walked quickly away. He watched the straightness of her spine, the flow of her golden hair brushing her shoulders, the curve of her waist and the sway of her hips. His hands still burned. His chest felt cold and empty. His heart ached. What if he quit his job and moved back home?
"Hello, Gator. I don't think you heard a word I said."
I didn't. His eyes didn't leave Avery's retreating figure until she disappeared around the corner of a building. Gator shifted his gaze to Kristen. Her lips were set in a straight line and her hands were planted on her slim hips.
"I think the lady doesn't want you. She didn't seem to be moved by your groveling."
Irritation flashed hot in his chest. Of all the people in the world he really didn't want to see him beg, Kristen would have been numbers 1 through 20, at least. But he had been begging for Avery, and he'd do it again. She has good taste. I was just trying to get her to lower her standards.
"To get to Avery's standards, you'd have to dig a hole," Kristen said with disdain. "If you'd have begged me like that, I would never have let you go."
He wasn't going to fight with Kristen again over whose fault it was that their marriage collapsed. He wasn't the one who cheated, and he wasn't the one who left. "Did you want something?"
"Yeah, they're going to give the Lumberjack Awards for first, second, and third place before the fireworks start. You need to get down there."
He'd forgotten about the ceremony the town always had before the fireworks. Everyone who won a competition would get a ribbon. He and Avery would get a prize for their tree, too. But it looked like she was leaving. Then he remembered she couldn't leave. She'd come with him. Unless she hitched a ride with someone else. "Thanks for the reminder," he said to Kristen before he took off at a jog in the direction Avery had gone. He turned the corner just in time to see a short, curvy blonde get in the passenger side of a pickup. A man, who looked very much like his suddenly ex-friend, McCoy, closed the door behind her and walked around to the driver's side. Gator sped up until he was almost full-on sprinting, but he was still a block away when the pickup pulled away from the curb. McCoy did a 3-point turn in the quiet street. As he backed up for the last time, Gator could see Avery's cheek shine in the street lamp. Pain shot through his chest like a mountain lion had dragged a claw from his breastbone to his abdomen. Just as the truck started forward, she looked up. Her eyes widened and her hand swiped at her cheek. He stopped in the middle of the street with his hands on his hips, his chest heaving. He'd already begged her to stay. Now he'd just chased after her. "Tell him to stop," he begged silently. But although her head twisted, keeping him in her sight until the truck had pulled away, her mouth stayed closed. At the last second, he saw her fingertips on the window as though she were reaching out for him, but the truck kept moving. He considered going back, but he didn't feel like celebrating. He certainly didn't want to be around people, especially Kristen. Plus, He hadn't had time to consider the question that had popped up in his mind earlier. What if he quit his job and moved back home? Avery brushed her hands together. Dust flew off of them and pooled in the sunlight that shone through the cracks in the barn.
Too bad you have tickets to see that concert with Mrs. Franks tonight. I think we could have finished clearing off the barn floor today,
Jillian said, dangling from a barn beam while attaching a string of lights.
It doesn't really matter. It's not like we can scrub it down. Water on these old boards will just rot them out. I wish there was something we could do about all this dust, though. We've swept it 100 times. The dust comes with the territory. I guess.
Avery looked around. This would be a perfect place for wedding receptions and family reunions, but people wouldn't put up with the dirt. It would need a thorough renovation before anyone would even consider renting it. Hopefully folks would overlook it for one Christmas party. Jillian finished tacking the string of lights to the horizontal beam.
You can tell me this is none of my business, but I kind of thought that Gator might be around to help us this week. After seeing you two looking so cozy at the Christmas celebration.
She hopped the last 3 feet to the floor and landed with a soft thump.
Of course you can ask. We've been through enough this fall with Harper and Wyatt's wedding and leaving for Chile, and the farms being short-handed. You've covered for me many times, and you've certainly earned the right to pry into my personal life, such that it is. And you have deftly sidestepped my question,
Jillian said with a slender brow arched high above her right eye. She placed a graceful hand on her slim hip.
Well?
Avery shrugged and looked at her nails, sparkly red and green. Happy colors she chose specifically to try to mitigate the black cloud that had hung on over the weekend and through the first few days of this week.
His job is in Montana. I'm planning on moving to D.C. Tell me how that's going to work. I think we're a little old to pretend that a Skype relationship is going to lead anywhere.
She gave Miss Prissypants a pat as she walked to the pile of greenery.
Don't people play the tuba in Montana or listen to music?
Avery picked up several pine boughs and arranged them in a swag long enough to go over the door, tying them with twine.
You're saying I should run off to Montana, chasing after some guy who's probably just going to leave me anyway once someone better comes along? Really? That's how you see Gator?
Jillian asked. Her head tilted to the side before she swung another string of lights over her shoulder and shimmied up the barn beam.
He's a man.
Miss Prissypants rubbed against Avery's leg. She cut the twine with a snap of her scissors before picking the cat up and petting her.
Men are the enemy? They leave. That's funny. Gator looks like a guy who wants to put down roots. Deep roots. He's already been married and divorced once.
That wasn't fair. None of what she was saying was. Gator was so much better than she was making him sound.
You know the details? Was it because he left? Really? I saw the ex. She looks like a gold digger.
Avery was slightly amazed at how well Jillian had pegged Kristen. She seemed to be confident in her assessment of Gator, too.
How can you tell these things about people? Maybe after working with animals so much in the circus, I'm better at reading nonverbal cues. I could be wrong. You're right about Kristen, according to Gator anyway.
Jillian clung to the overhead beam as she tacked the light string up.
I don't have to live with your choices. Only you do. I just think you might be a little wrong about Gator. He never said anything about long term, and honestly, life is messier with a man in it. I don't need one.
But she wanted one. It was some kind of internal desire that she couldn't shake, but only for one specific man.
Your choice. Seems to be yours, too.
Avery set her cat down and picked up 2 more pine boughs.
My life is going to be dedicated to making the world a better place for animals.
Jillian tossed a treat. It landed on the floor about 10 feet away. Her dog came out from under the old hay mow and snatched it before going back to its makeshift cave.
You'll be great at that.
Avery didn't even flinch from the dog, thanks to Gator.
The nice thing about having a barn floor you can't scrub is that you can do things like that and it doesn't matter a bit.
Jillian laughed.
It's perfect for dogs and men. And kids. So basically, only women won't appreciate it.
Jillian jumped down, landing lightly on the barn floor. Avery set her things aside. Jillian unplugged the lights and walked out the door in front of Avery.
Yeah, and I think with the right ambience, women will love it too.
At least, she hoped so. 90 minutes later, Avery pulled into the Franks drive. She hadn't seen Gator since she practically ran away from him at the Christmas celebration. Thankfully, she'd run into McCoy, who was also leaving before the presentations and fireworks, and he'd been happy to give her a ride home. He'd been upset that Gator had brought her and left her, so she'd had to explain that it was all her fault. She paused for a moment before she got out of her car. Maybe Gator wasn't home. Maybe she wouldn't run into him. Maybe the cramping in her stomach was indigestion and not nerves caused by the possibility of seeing him again. Definitely nerves, she reasoned, as the front door opened and he stepped out wearing dark blue jeans, a bright green plaid button-up, and scuffed brown cowboy boots, and her lungs froze. Her heart, on the other hand, tried to jump out of her throat, presumably to try to get closer to the man it beat for. Drat the stupid thing. Well, she could hardly drive away, and she was only making herself look stupid by sitting there, so she yanked on her door handle and stepped out of the car. "Hey," Gator said as he walked down the walk toward her. The lights from the Christmas decorations emphasized the rugged lines of his face, but his eyes were shadowed. His shirt made his shoulders look wider as she allowed herself a couple of seconds to admire them, before she forced herself to look away. She'd never seen him dressed this nicely, not even at the Christmas celebration, so he must be going out. Maybe with Kristen. The thought stung, and she pushed it away.
Hey, your mom and I are going to a concert together. I'm here to pick her up. I'll just walk in myself. Looks like you're headed out, so I don't want to hold you up or anything.
He had tilted his head and let her ramble, but he didn't move out of her way. She ended up stopped in front of him and forced herself to stop rambling. "Mom had a pretty crappy day. She's sleeping now, but before she laid down, she asked me to take her place." His feet were planted apart and his hands hung down at his sides like a gunslinger at high noon, waiting on her response.
What's wrong? Is it just the treatments?
"Yeah, each time she goes, it hits her a little harder. This has been the worst week so far. Thankfully, there's just one more."
Yeah. Then hopefully nothing but good reports. I wish she'd have said something when I spoke with her on the phone yesterday.
"She told me she knows you're busy with the barn and didn't want you to take time away from that for her."
I see.
Avery fingered her Christmas tree earrings. A couple of beats of silence ticked by. "If you don't want to go with me, I understand," Gator finally said. Avery pushed the worry over Mrs. Franks aside. Suddenly, she felt young and carefree. Every time she'd been with Gator, she'd had fun, and tonight would be no different. She batted her eyes. "You're tall, handsome, and you took 3rd place in the lumberjack competition. Of course I want to go with you." His jaw sagged before he said, "You're going to hold that 3rd place finish over my head for the next 100 years, aren't you?" "Nope. I'll take an artistic man over big muscles any day." "Well, I don't have an artistic cell in my body. Are you sure you don't want to rethink your choice of a date for this evening?" "You have artistic cells. I'll help you find them. We're going to the college orchestra concert after all." Gator stopped in the act of opening her door for her. "Orchestra concert?" "Yes, and you are not allowed to say anything nice about the tubist." "That won't be hard." Gator smirked at her. "What's a tuba?" "Whoa, stop right there, mister. I don't require my dates to be able to play an instrument, but they at least have to be able to identify the brass section." He closed her door and walked around the car. After he sat, he glanced over. "I can pick out the harp, I think. Is there a harp in the orchestra?" A harpist would rather be sharp than out of tune, and I hope you aren't ticklish." Avery waved her fingers in the air, imitating a harpist's hand movements. "Oh boy." Gator's expression was mock horrified. "I'm definitely ticklish, but only on my feet. Might work if I don't take my boots off." "Guess a foot massage is out of the question." "But you're not a harpist." Gator winked at her. Avery wiggled her fingers in the air again. "I can give a good imitation." Gator laughed, which was a better sound than the entire orchestra, including the harp, playing a perfect chord. "Did you really not know that we were going to see the orchestra?" "Nope. Just got in 20 minutes before you got there. She'd mentioned at lunch she didn't feel well, but it wasn't until I walked in tonight that she asked me to take her place. Until I was done with my shower, she was sound asleep on the couch." He looked over at her. "I made sure home nursing would send someone at the normal time." "Oh, good." Avery signaled, then turned right. "You don't have to suffer through this if you hate it. I know it's not for everyone." "I might be able to force myself to sit through it if you hold my hand." "That's it. That's all it takes." "Yeah, that's all it takes." With a little twist in her chest, she took her hand off the steering wheel and placed it between them, palm up. "I'm a big believer in practicing." "I just converted." He slipped his hand into hers. The same sweet sensations from before slipped like a slow melody up her arm, wrapping around and squeezing her heart. Her lungs stumbled before she stiffened and forced air into them. His thumb rubbed over her super-sensitized skin. She kept her eyes on the road. How was it that just holding this man's hand threatened to derail her entire concentration? "I thought about this a lot this week," Gator said softly. "Me too." After his raw honesty, she was unable to be anything but the same. The only sound was the muted hum of the car motor. Lights blinked in the interior as they passed street lights and decorations. "What are we going to listen to tonight? Holiday music?" "Not exactly." She launched into an explanation of the music being performed tonight and why they were playing it close to Christmas. Gator seemed interested and asked pertinent questions, which surprised and pleased her. When they arrived, he hopped out and opened her car door, then took her hand again. "Is this odd for you?"
What, holding a man's hand?
She shrugged.
Actually, yes. I haven't done it much.
I was actually talking about going to a concert to watch and not play.
Oh.
She laughed.
Yes, I guess that's kind of not the norm. But over the years, I've enjoyed live music in which I've not been playing.
She hadn't really thought of it, but she really hadn't been to a full orchestra concert simply to listen and enjoy for years.
Hopefully, this will be the last one. I'm going to audition the day after tomorrow.
That's great, Gator said, and she believed he meant it. What about the storm that's coming? Will they reschedule?
No, I actually have the very last spot on the audition schedule. The announcement will be made Monday and rehearsals start after the new year.
You're going down early?
To avoid the snow, I can't. Jillian and I need every second left to get the barn fixed. I've driven in snow before. I'll be fine.
Gator didn't answer, but his lips set in a disapproving line. They arrived at the door to the auditorium. Avery handed their tickets to the usher, who directed them to their seats. The familiar scent of music cases and rosin mingled with the palpable excitement and nervousness of a live performance. Avery squeezed Gator's hand as regret and eagerness, along with anticipation and desire, swirled through her. He squeezed back. "You're okay?"
Yes.
Her body hummed with emotion, set on edge by the man beside her. "Where's this tuba player that I have to hate?"
You don't have to hate him.
"I know." He shifted, putting his arm around the back of her seat. His fingers rested lightly on her shoulder. At that moment, she would rather have been in the audience than on the biggest stage in the world. As long as Gator was beside her, it wouldn't matter. Her brain froze. Was that true? As long as Gator was beside her, it wouldn't matter where she was or what she did? She examined her mind, trying to determine if she really believed that. Before she had enough time to think, he asked her about the music listed in the program, and they talked until the lights dimmed. Chapter 14. With his fingers on her shoulder, Gator could feel the music pulse through Avery. Even if he weren't touching her, her enjoyment was obvious on her face, and he admired it openly. It wasn't like he needed to be looking at the stage in order to hear the music, which, to his surprise, he hadn't hated. But he liked Avery's expressive face far more than the music. Idly, he wondered if this was music one could dance to. Ballroom dancing, maybe? He'd never been even the slightest bit interested, but for the chance to hold Avery while she closed her eyes and enjoyed something so thoroughly, he'd suddenly developed a very, very strong interest. The music got louder, seeming to build the excitement in the room, just as the feelings built in his chest. The decision he'd been kicking around for a while suddenly seemed crystal clear. Funny how being close to Avery had made a lot of the things he'd thought were important seem like they really weren't important at all. By the time the concert was over and he was outside opening her car door, he'd made a couple of life-changing decisions. But he wasn't going to rush into anything, and he definitely wasn't going to push Avery into anything. "Would you like to go somewhere and get dessert?" he asked before he shut the door. She fingered her earring, her face still flushed and beautiful from the emotions the music had evoked.
I would love to, she answered.
He grinned and closed the door. Maybe she wasn't interested in any type of relationship with him. He wasn't even sure what he wanted. but he enjoyed being with her and didn't want the night to end. Not ever. When she pulled into the all-night diner, he hopped out to get her door. She hadn't complained. Avery was quite capable of opening her own door, but he loved giving her that respect, showing that deference to her. He wasn't lying when he said he loved that she made him feel strong and capable, protective. Manly traits that not all women appreciated anymore, but traits that were an integral part of who he was. In Avery, he'd found a woman who wanted him to be a man, and who wanted to act like a woman. He wanted to lap it up. He opened her door instead.
"Thanks,"
she said as she emerged from the car.
"It's gotten much colder since we left your house this evening."
It's definitely below freezing now. I'm glad the weather held out for the celebration.
Me too. I could have been sitting on the dunking booth facing a block of ice in that tank.
He laughed. Oh no, they'd put an ice melter in there. The town council has ways of making you suffer. Trust me. He held the restaurant door open for her.
I'll keep that in mind for next year.
She swept by him and he breathed in her scent. Just keep a hot chocolate handy for whatever new-to-town sucker they rope into doing that booth. The hostess greeted them and led them through the mostly empty restaurant to their seats.
"I think you just called me a sucker,"
Avery said after the hostess left. "If the shoe fits," Gator said from behind his menu.
"Oh boy, does it ever fit. Better than it should. It won't fit next year, that's for sure."
They studied their menus until the waitress came over to get drinks and take their orders. Well, in the town's defense, they do make a lot of money from that booth, Gator said when she left.
"I believe it. There was never a time when there wasn't a line."
She took a sip of her water and her bracelets jangled. A pretty silver chain with several charms hung around her neck. Her nails were painted and sparkling, and Gator loved how her classy femininity contrasted with his blunt masculinity. The contrast between them drew him. "Funny how humans enjoy making other humans suffer," he said.
"I don't think they really enjoyed my suffering."
"I think they enjoyed mine," he said with a grin.
"Thank you for that, by the way."
"You know, I had a good time then, and I'm having a great time tonight. I enjoyed working with you in the barn. Whenever I'm with you, I have a good time."
"I do too. But Gator, you know anything between us will never work out."
"Really?" He tried to keep his tone light.
"Really. Also, I've steered clear of relationships since my fiancé left me for another woman. It just seems like it's a given that men leave."
"You really believe that?" She shrugged and looked away. He didn't think she really thought all men leave. Maybe she'd convinced herself she did. The waitress brought their desserts. Avery smiled and thanked her. Gator's appetite was gone. There wasn't any way for him to convince Avery that he wasn't like most men. It was something she would have to decide for herself.
"Jillian says you're the kind of man to put down roots."
"I like Jillian." Hope stirred in his chest.
"I think that's true, but I don't want to take that chance."
He'd hoped to change her mind and tried not to be disappointed that one night of fun together hadn't moved her on that issue. Fair enough. He needed to change the subject before he got too depressed and became a bad date. "How are your party plans coming?" Avery's face lit up.
"I've been trying to find pictures of the barn from back in the 80s, but haven't had much luck at the newspaper." Ellie's former in-laws had a few, but most of theirs were older.
My mom has tons of pictures. Did you already go through all of hers?
Some of them. I've hesitated because of her being so tired. I didn't want to make more work for her since she said they were in the attic and she'd have to hunt for them.
I'll do it. Avery smiled with surprise and pleasure.
Thanks. I really need to practice tomorrow evening. Then I have the audition the next evening in D.C., but Saturday evening would work for me.
Me too. I'll plan on it. I can have the boxes out and maybe some pictures sorted by then. He didn't like the idea of her going to D.C. alone in a snowstorm. Not because she was a woman and he thought she was weak. Not at all. He would question anyone driving that far in the kind of snow they were forecasted to get. The roads to Washington were not known for their safety either. But he didn't say anything.
Why did you decide not to team up with Kristen's project?
Avery asked after he'd paid the bill and they'd started for the car. He really didn't want to talk about his ex. I'm not. It took me exactly half a second to think about that and come to a decision. She'd laughed, as he'd intended, but turned thoughtful after he'd settled himself in the car across from her.
Why not?
I guess the first reason that comes to mind is that the last time she made promises to me, she didn't exactly keep them. I can't see that she's changed. After all, she married that poor guy, got him to buy her what she wanted, and now they're divorcing too.
Oh, I didn't know.
My mom found out somehow. People might have thought he'd jump at the chance to work with her, knowing that she was single and available. It had only made him run faster. Until then, I hadn't known either. Still don't care.
You hate her?
Nah. Just now I can see where I made a lot of mistakes. Stupid decisions and choices. Not doing it again.
Ah, you're wiser.
Yeah. They rode in silence the rest of the way to his mother's house. Avery pulled in and he hopped out, as he had before, to open her door. She rolled the window down.
I think I'll not go in. It's late.
Disappointment rolled through him. He hadn't realized, but a glance at the clock on the dash said it was after midnight. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep you out so long.
I had fun.
Me too. Let me check on my mom, then I'll follow you home in my truck. He barely kept from wincing as he said it, knowing that such a suggestion was something that would have garnered him a "women aren't helpless babies" lecture from most other women he knew.
I don't want to put you out.
It'd be worse to be here wondering and worrying. She shrugged.
If you want.
I want. He smiled and straightened. Be right back. He ran in, wiping his boots carefully but not pulling them off. In the light coming in from the window from the decorations in the yard, he could see his mother slept soundly on the couch. Grabbing his keys, he ducked back out the door. Avery waved as he jogged to his truck. She backed out and he followed her to the farm, where all the lights were off except the pole light by the farm office. Avery parked in front of the house, and he pulled in behind her, shutting his pickup off so it didn't wake anyone.
Thanks, she said as he walked up. I'm here safe.
He didn't give her a chance to back away, but strode up to her and put his arms around her. Thank you, for the best evening I've ever had.
That's big.
I'm serious. She hadn't pulled away, so he drew her closer. Don't be mad at my mom.
What?
She really was tired. Comprehension dawned in her eyes.
You bribed your mother to let you go.
Her arms, which had started to slide around his waist, stopped, and she gripped his shirt in her hands. No. He stroked the back of her neck, loving the feel of the soft skin meeting her hairline. She was going to cancel at noon. I asked her to hold on and not make a decision until I got home, which was later than I expected. I didn't cheat my mother out of a nice evening out. I just kept her from having you give her a ticket to anyone but me. His other hand slid down to the small of her back with a little pressure, pushing her body into his.
That's sneaky.
I wanted to spend the evening with you. Her narrowed eyes widened, and her hands loosened and slid the rest of the way around him. Her head started to bend down to rest against his chest, but he didn't want cuddling. Not tonight. Not now, at least. He was after more. I'm going to kiss you goodnight. Her head jerked back up. Her eyes searched his out.
No, you're not.
His heart sank.
You've held my hand, opened my car door, held my chair, followed me home. This move is mine.
She blinked.
But you're going to have to bend down because I can't reach you.
He laughed. How about we fix that problem this way? He bent his knees and picked her up, pressing her whole body to his. But he didn't swoop down and take her lips, respecting her request to be the one to do the kissing. Gladly. Her hands came up and cupped his cheeks, softly swishing against his stubble.
I love the way this feels.
Makes two of us.
I also like being able to look directly into your eyes.
She leaned a little closer. They're nothing special. Yours, on the other hand, are almost amazingly expressive and beautiful. Her lips were so close his almost brushed them as he spoke. He resisted the urge to close that tiny distance. You're soft and sweet and—
How do you know I'm sweet?
She murmured. He smiled. Prove me wrong. Her lips brushed his, lightly, almost intangibly. He groaned. She smiled that powerful smile that said she knew the effect she was having on him and was thoroughly enjoying it. With her body pressed to his and her weight filling his arms, she could take all night long. Delectable torture. More feathery touches that only served to heat his blood and weaken his knees. He turned, leaning against her car hood so that her weight was partially on him, keeping her face level with his. Her hands gripped his hair, and he relished the slight pressure. Finally, her lips settled on his, firmly, and did not skip away. He pressed back with another low groan. Her tongue tiptoed out, and he opened to receive it, pulling her in, hot and welcoming. He caught her gasp, absorbed her sigh, and deepened their connection. The air around them crackled. He couldn't get deep enough, couldn't get close enough, couldn't get enough air. He broke away, gasping. She twisted, and he allowed her body to slide down his, eliciting another groan from both of them. Keeping her hands on his waist, she stood, panting as hard as he. The wind ruffled the bare branches above them with a hollow wooden sound. Her hair shifted around her flushed face and parted lips. He fisted his hands as she took another step back, but grabbed her waist again as she stumbled. Their eyes met. I was right. You are sweet. She was a million other tastes that he couldn't explain, but already craved to taste again. And again. She stepped back even further,
Maybe we shouldn't do that again.
Maybe your music was a little more powerful than I had given it credit for.
It was the music?
I don't know what the heck else it was. He'd never felt anything like it. She nodded rapidly. He prepared to catch her again, hoping his shaking knees would hold them both if she did fall.
You're definitely right. Let's blame the music. No more classical music for you, mister. You obviously can't handle it.
Me? That was your kiss. Last time I'm kissing a tuba player without protection, he continued, leaning against the car and crossed his arms over his chest. With any luck, she wouldn't notice that his knees were still shaking too badly for him to attempt to stand.
Protection?
A fire extinguisher or something. She let out a little shaky laugh. Do me a favor, Avery.
Yeah?
Go to the house. Now. You don't know how bad I want to do that again. And you're standing there all soft and warm and sweet. She blinked at him. So help him, if she didn't move, he was going to find out exactly how steady his knees were. Have mercy, lady, please. Maybe she saw it in his eyes. She turned and ran up the steps, grabbing the door and slipping through, closing it softly behind her. Gator leaned against her car a little longer. Great. Now he knew exactly how she felt and exactly how she tasted. The only word that described both was perfect. Instinct told him there'd never be another woman who'd light his fire so easily and completely. On one hand, he was thrilled. Avery wasn't just physically attractive to him. She had a beautiful, unselfish heart. She couldn't be any more perfect. On the other hand, he'd been devastated tonight. That kiss had rocked him down to his toes. But the lady had already told him no, firmly. He'd thought maybe he could convince her to change that no to a yes. But it seemed like he'd scared her off instead. Heck, that kiss had scared him. He should have listened to his mother. Years ago, she'd said, "If you can't have it, don't try it, because it only takes one to get addicted." She'd been talking about vices like drugs, alcohol, and cigarettes. He'd never tell her, but she should have added kissing Avery to the list. No doubt about it, he was addicted. Hi, this is Jay, and thanks for listening. If you're ready for another great audiobook, here's one we think you might like. Or check out the playlist with all our latest releases. Don't forget to subscribe to Say with Jay, give this video a thumbs up, and tell us what you liked in the comments.